Well, thank you all for coming tonight. It's so good to see your faces. On some of you kind of hide yourself, but most of you get to see your faces. And I want to remind you that I'm smart enough to know that the real teacher is the Holy Spirit. And that all of us have these filters that we have developed through our own study and our spiritual gift and our experiences. And I just hope you'll let me speak to you, and then the things that you think are either too much, too little, or off base, that you'll just think about, research on your own, right? None of us have perfect theology for sure. So I'm basically sharing you the best I know at this point in my life. And I must admit that since I did some of these videos, 20, 30 years ago, that I have understood the Bible differently as I have gone through more of it. So I thank you so much for praying for me, and I thank you for coming tonight. Now, last week we had a little bit of a technical glitch. We advertised about going live on Facebook, and we weren't able to do that. So that introduction in chapters 1 and 2 are now on both Facebook and on YouTube, and you can click on those and watch them at your leisure. But I want to say to you now that the critical part of Ecclesiastes is the introduction, because this is a different kind of literary genre than we're used to. It's certainly different than what Western people are used to. And if you are a Western literalist, you're going to have a conniption fit going through this book, because it's going to say some things tonight. It's going to say some things that'll just blow your socks off. You got to see it in context. Context first of the ancient Near East tradition of wisdom literature. Now that's all in the introductions available last week. You also got to see in the context of the chapter or literary unit that it's in, because quite often it's playing on other things that have been said. So I really encourage you. I'm going to do chapters 3 through 5 tonight, but I hope if you haven't seen the introduction, you'll take time to go back and particularly look at the introduction section of that tape. Okay, tonight, Charlie, if you'll put up Ecclesiastes chapter 3, I want to say a couple of words to you about this. The reason I put this up is that I compare this paragraphing condition, even though there is no textual marker for paragraphs in Hebrew or in Greek. It is crucial in interpreting any kind of written material to try to group together the sentences on certain subjects. And so what this is several English translations, and they're from different translation theories, from word for word to dynamic equivalent. And what they're trying to do is show you how these translation committees see the unified sentences or verses. And then they try to capsule what they think is the essence. So if you're a teacher or preacher, in my opinion, this is the way you outline your sermon. You do it by the paragraphs of the original inspired author and not by some made up outline that you kind of were taught in seminary, like 3 points on a poem. No. Let's go back to the original author's outline, and that's going to be the paragraphs. And of course, these literary units are the author's way of presenting his own material in the form of a structure. And it's crucial that we see that and follow that. Now, if you look at those characterizations, I really like there's two of them I like on this one. The New Revised Standard, I thought, caught the essence well. Everything has its time determined by God. Now that's crucial. But the second division, I would go over to the New American Standard. God set eternity in the heart of man. I think that's crucial. Now, if you look at the New King James, it's going to be characterized as the God-given task. The same thought. Now, if you go back over to the New Revised Standard, you see as you go down to verse 16, human injustice is subject to divine judgment. Now, I think that tells you pretty clearly what we're going to talk about here in chapter 3. Most of my life, I have preached on chapter 3 several times, because it's usually presented as there's an appropriate time for this human activity. And that's how it's presented, usually in sermons. But I would submit to you that this book has two focuses. What if there is no God? That's going to be characterized by vanity of vanity, all is vanity, and under the sun. But it's going to say there is a God. So there are two theological tensions here. An atheistic, this is all there is, and a covenant theology from Israel. So I think this chapter is emphasizing the sovereignty of God, that he allows these things in human life because there is a divine plan. Now, to know that divine plan, you've got to trust him, because the essence of Ecclesiastes is you can't affect the past. You can't even remember what was done in the past, and you can't affect the future. All you can affect is the present. And what this book is going to say, you don't know if tomorrow is going to be good or bad. You don't know if pain or joy or wealth or poverty is coming tomorrow. So the whole point is, choose that you believe there is a God, that he is good, that he wants to know you, and enjoy life where, when, and how you can. Now, this is not a New Testament book, brothers. Jesus isn't in this thing. This is a covenant of Israel's wisdom literature piece. So thank God for the New Testament. Thank God for progressive revelation. But as we come to interpret the Bible, the first thing we must do before we go to other parallel passages is to determine the intent of the original author. Then, after we have done that as best we can, then we can start applying that, and then we can start seeing what else the Bible says on the same subject, particularly the New Covenant revelations that either confirm this, extend this, or change it in some way. So I hope you see where I'm coming from. This is called biblical theology. I want to try to understand what the author was saying to his day. This is not systematic theology where I try to bring all the Bible's relevance into these subjects. Now, it's really important that you understand what I'm saying here. There's more to be said, but I don't plan on saying it because I'm going to deal with Ecclesiastes only for the most part. I hope that makes sense. Let's go to the contextual insights for a minute. I have several thoughts here right below that outline, Charlie. Yeah, thanks. Let's look at number A. This chapter is usually interpreted as dealing with the timeliness and appropriateness of human actions. A time to do this, a time to do that. But I submit to you, this is a text about the sovereignty of God. Now, friends, I want to know you, I'm not a Calvinist. That when the Bible talks about the sovereignty of God, we better talk about the sovereignty of God. And if you're going to start a theology, you certainly can't start a theology with the fallen humanity. No. All theology must start with there is a God, he is good, and he is in control. And that's what this is saying. And the places I would say, if you want to check me on that, are the end of chapter 2, verses 24 through 26, a wonderful summary. And in chapter 3, verse 14, it's going to be said again. So I think this is a text on God allows these human activity. But here's the point. This human activity means nothing if you don't know God. Human beings do these things all the time. Every one of these things is normal to all human beings. But here's the problem. This is a fallen world. This is not the world that God intended it to be. So we live in this confusion of the fog, and we live in the uncertainty of life, which we cannot control. But we do believe that there is a God who does control. Now, number B here, the next little phrase, number A in your notes, I think. When interpreting this book, I'm just screaming this. I hope you hear me screaming this. You must understand these key terms because they are not, the Bible is written for you, but not to you. You can't read your native tongue into these words and understand what's being said. These are technical wisdom literature terms used throughout the ancient Near East, but particularly here. So what terms am I talking about? Vanity, vanity of vanities, chapter 1, verse 2. Under the sun, chapter 1, verse 3, verse 9, and advantage, chapter 1, Abias, verse 3. These are key words. They're used in a specialized sense. If you miss that, I think you're going to have real problems trying to understand this book. So the next one down, number B. The central answer to the meaningless and frustration of life is found in. Now, this is what he's talking about. Life is meaningless. If there is no God, we're just animated fertilizer. There's no memory of us. No matter what we do, how much we think, how there's no memory. You're dead, you're dead. See, this book is going to say there's more. That's why this book speaks so powerfully to materialists and intellectuals and naturalists because it forces them to come to the logical conclusion, is this all there is? Remember Helen Redding's song, is this all there is? It is. When I get close to life's end, is this the end? Is it the black abyss and nothing more? Do I cry out to the universe and it doesn't answer? So this is the pain here. So all is vanity, faith and obedience. Now, I think there are several places this is talked about, but chapter 12, verses 13 and 14, which may be an editorial addition to bring this book back into kind of a traditional thought, which it needed to get in the canon. Or number 2, the simple pleasures, daily pleasures of life. The same pleasures that the rich man has, the poor man has. I was just thinking how wonderful it is to be with friends, how wonderful it is to be with family, to be with wife, to be with children, to be with neighbors, to be with church folk. There's joy in community. And what he's saying is, enjoy today. Smell the roses. Quit running down the path. Stop and look around. These are crucial thoughts. The other one that I've added to the notes that I guess I don't know why I didn't put in earlier, but I've added it. You can add it to your notes there, is fear God. Now, this is the theme that occurs 3:14, 5:7, 7:18, chapter 8, 12, and 13, and again, chapter 12, verse 13. This fear God. And again, fear is a major word study. This is not terror or fright, or this is awe, respect, giving due reverence to. You got to understand these words and how they were used by and understood by the first hearers. Okay, let's look then. The first 8 verses are obviously in poetic form, and there is a parallelism here. Now, sometimes it's a synonymous parallelism, sometimes it's an antithetical parallelism. If you're interested in looking at Hebrew poetry, I have done a special topic on that, and it's available to you online afterwards. So let's look at chapter 3, verse 1. And here is this crucial term, appointed time. Now, appointed time, you could say there's an appropriate time for everything. Yes, but the trick is the appropriate time is the time that's been appointed by God, who is the creator of all things. So it's not just an appropriate time to get married, an appropriate time to have children, an appropriate time to die. No. The events of our life, though common to all human beings made in the image and likeness of God, are ordained by God. I think that's so powerful that we hear that in a world like ours. Now, then you can see that I've tried to do several words there, beginning in the second kind of item in chapter 1. And I put all these different translations to show you what a wide semantic field this really is. Now, if you go back to a Hebrew lexicon, it's going to say this word means delight or pleasure. That doesn't fit this at all, really. You've got to remember that words only have meaning in sentences. They don't have meanings in dictionaries. So it looks like in this particular context, it's talking about the daily human activity that brings joy. Now, what are we talking about? Eat, drink, love your family, like that. Enjoy each day, smell the roses. All humans have is the immediate. They don't have the past, they don't have the future, they have today. Live today, enjoy today, thank God for today. Okay, now when we come down to chapter verses 2 through 8, it seems like that there's a poetic structure, and all the different translations, most modern English translations show that. But when you start trying to identify the parallelism, it becomes a little more difficult. It's hard to pick out of the parallelism we understand, how these lines fit together. So I'll just make that point there. A time to give birth and a time to die. It looks like we're talking about the cycle from humans arriving on the scene to humans leaving the scene. And this is true of everyone. Any human, this life cycle fits. There's a time for birth, there's a time for death. You can't affect either one, but these are the common experience of men and women in this world. A time to plant and a time to uproot. Now, in chapter 2, verse 26, there are 2 infinitive constructs. In the first few verses, 2 through 9 of chapter 3, there are 27 infinitive constructs. Now, this isn't by accident. And remember, verse divisions are not inspired. There is a series of specialized Hebrew grammar forms showing us the connection between these forms. And when you ask yourself, what is these connections? It looks like the efforts of sinners. This is what sinners try to do, experience a daily life. Even apart from God, these same kind of things happen. Okay. Now, it's been interesting to me that some of these, it is possible that this idea about the plant and the time to uproot is basically a Hebrew idiom for harvest time. Now, remember, Israel and all the countries in the ancient world were agricultural based, or either herd based. But Israel was agricultural based for the most part. And so here there's a time to plant and there's a time to harvest. And that's what it's talking about here. Now, in verse 3, when it says a time to kill and a time to heal, again, you say to yourself, what does that mean? Well, because war is mentioned in verse 8, I don't think this refers to war. So I'm just thinking now, I don't know if the text can tell you which one, but I think there's something besides war. So what are we talking about? Well, could it be capital punishment within Israel? Could it be the defense of one's home or person from robbers or thieves or invaders? Could it be the Jewish Publication Society says it means a time for slaying and a time for healing? And they suggest that maybe we're talking about people who were wounded in battle and now they have to recover. But again, I want to say war doesn't occur till verse 8. So I'm not sure exactly what this time to kill and a time to heal mean in this context. A time to weep and a time to laugh. It looks to me like we're talking about funerals and social events of great joy like weddings, or in a Jewish community later on, bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah. In a South American society, it's that 16th birthday for girls. Great, joyful social times. That's what I think this is talking about. So there's a time to be sad. Things happen. People are sick. People die. And there's a time to rejoice. And it's common in human experience. Now, in verse 5, and don't throw anything at the TV. Just give me a chance and you can check me. It says a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones. So you said to yourself, what could that refer to? Now, there's nothing in the text that explains it. So could it mean getting stones out of the ground? Because, a lot of Palestine is stony ground. So it's hard for the plow. So they would take the stones and put them on the side. It might mean building a stone wall out of the stones you take out of the ground, or building a house out of the stones you take out of the ground. We're just not sure. Jewish commentators think this refers to sexual activity. Now, you say that is crazy. Well, it goes back to Leviticus about there are certain times that you can make love and certain times you can't make love. And they see this stones as a reference to this sexual activity. So you can check this and see what you think. A time to embrace and a time to shun embracing. That parallelism is where they get the idea of human love involved in this. Now, again, is this sexual love within marriage? Is this sexual love outside of a marriage? Is this family loving one another, caring for one another? Or is this, here again, it's possible in the ancient Near East and in today, people greet each other by kissing on each side of the cheek. So maybe that's a nice little of that. I guess what I'm saying is we don't know exactly what it's talking about, but it's not so important we can identify the specificity because we're talking about common human experiences throughout life that all humans go through. So whatever the details are, the main point is quite clear. Now in verse 6, it says a time to search and a time to give up what is lost. Now, all of us have lost things, whether it be animals, money, children, friends, marriages, whatever. And we try to fix it. We try to repair it. We want to get back what we had. But there comes a time in the life of all humans where you say, I can't fix it. I can't get it back. There's no way to restore the way it used to be. So what the author is saying is there's a time to fervently seek da-da-da. But there's a time to recognize you got to get on with living. You can't spend the rest of your life seeking that which can't be found. So it's kind of a word for wisdom here, obviously. Now, when it says a time to tear apart and a time to sow, I asked myself, with my understanding of the Hebrew background, what could this refer to? Well, as you know, there's a Hebrew mourning rite, grieving rite, that, remember how the high priest tore his robe at what he considered Jesus' blasphemy? Well, this is the sign of mourning. You tear your robe, but being Jewish, they don't want to ruin the robes. They just tear it about 4 or 5, 6 inches. And so when you're over mourning, you sew it back up. So this looks like a grieving rite to me. I've given you a special topic on Hebrew grieving rite. So if you're interested in seeing all the other idioms that are involved, you can look that up later. Notice it says a time to be silent and a time to speak. Now, I've added one possibility here, and you could add many more, and I hope you will. I hope my notes are thought-provoking. I want to be grist for the mill for you thinking about how you understand this. When it says be silent, it's either don't speak at a funeral time or a mourning time. Don't try to say something just to say something. I always get tickled. I think the worst thing we can possibly say to somebody who's hurting and grieving is to quote Romans 8:28. Well, I think Romans 8:28 is true, but there's a time to quote that and a time not to. And immediately grieving is not the time to do it. The other one is be silent in the sense of don't give out information. Maybe it's the don't cast your pearls before swine kind of parallel in the New Testament. There's a time you don't have to share everything you know with everybody every time. And it's wisdom to know when and how to do that. Okay, a time for war and a time for peace. Now, the Jewish commentators say this refers to a national experience, Israel as a nation. But as I read what follows, it looks very individual to me. So I'm not sure I buy that understanding. And just an arrogant statement here. I hope you'll think through what I'm saying. I remember I bought the Talmud. Oh, it was so expensive, 38 volumes. And I bought it because I wanted to find out all the possible background, some of these texts from rabbinical thought. But it became very obvious to me that rabbinical thought is using a totally different hermeneutic than I am. And much of it has to do with numerology or folk stories. And it was not helpful at all. I really believe that exegesis, whether it's done by a Christian or a Jew, is superior to these folk stories and word plays and number plays that I hear so often in some of these Jewish traditions. So I do believe that Christians indwelt by the Holy Spirit are better interpreters of the Old Testament. I hope it doesn't sound, I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I am saying knowing Jesus and having an indwelling spirit is a key. So many times these Jewish interpretations are not only wrong, they're just crazy. And of course, sometimes they really help. Sorry. Let's see. Okay, let's go down to the next group, which is 9 through 11. The word prophet appears here, verse 9 and 10. This is another major term. And we're talking about what gives true advantage, what gives lasting profit. And what he's going to say is wealth doesn't, wisdom doesn't, possession doesn't, fame doesn't. He's going to list all the things that people think will make them happy, but they don't. They don't. And so this can't mean that. So I think we're talking about lasting benefit. We might even put spiritual benefit. And that's what we're talking about here. So what profit is there? And here's the question. Is there lasting values in what workers do? And his answer is no. You can be the best worker in the world, and it comes to naught. It comes to nothing. That's what's so painful to us. I had a footnote here I wanted to mention. Oh yeah, I've added this, so it's not in your notes. Let me just look at it for a minute. It goes with verse 10. At first glance, this seems to contradict the good, in quotes, of Genesis 1. Remember, and he made this, and it was good, and he made this, and it was good, and he made this, and it was good. And finally, in Genesis 1:31, he says, it is very good. Now, if you read this seems to contradict that, but I want to remind you, the Bible really has a disjunction. 1 and 2 are God and man in perfect fellowship, a wonderful place, the Garden of Eden. From Genesis 3 all the way to Revelation 20 is cleaning up the mess of the rebellion of Adam and Eve. And then Revelation 21 and 22, I think, is a restored Eden. So what we want to say is this is not the world that it intended to be. I guess of all the questions that people ask me is why, if God's so good and God's so powerful, why disease? Why wars? Why accidents? I certainly can't answer that, but I do know this. We can't put on God's doorstep the evil and suffering in the world today, because this is not the world that God intended it to be. Let me give you the name of a book that has been helpful to me through the years. It's by a man named Wenham, W-E-N-H-A-M. It's called The Goodness of God, ? He really takes seriously the evil and suffering in the world, and then he tries to give a biblical answer. Wyndham, The Goodness of God. But I think this is not the world. This current situation of pain and suffering and futility and nothing lasts, that is not the way God intended, nor the way it will be. I want to read the last little paragraph here in verses 9 and 10. Kind of hang with me. I hope you have the notes. It seems that humanity is driven to perform certain common tasks even provided by God, but they are unable to understand the purpose or outcome of these tasks. The purpose of these tasks is to show them their dependence on God, which is the opposite of the common experience of the fall, independence from God, characterized by the recurrent phrase, under the sun. See the full notes at chapter 1, verse 3. Now in 3:11, we have, I think, two key thoughts here. Notice the capitalized pronoun. It's not capitalized in Hebrew, of course, but all of these English common translation committees believe this referring to God. And here again is the word appropriate again. Here is the Hebrew word fair or beautiful. And what it's basically saying is, in this context, it's describing God's sovereign choices that control human circumstances. You can look at this yourself and see this. And the next little phrase, he again, capital H, the translating committees think it's referring to God. We're bringing God back into this broken system, has set eternity in their heart. Now, this word eternity, this is a difficult translation. This is the Hebrew word olam, which can mean forever or for a period of time or for age abounding. It has to be interpreted in context. This is pretty much the only place that it's translated this way. Now, there is a related Semitic term, and when I say Semitic term, I'm talking about Akkadian and Arabic and Sanskrit. All of these Semitic languages have a 3-consonantal root. And what we do, when we have a difficult word in Hebrew, we try to go to these cognate languages and say, what does this 3-letter root mean in these other languages? Now, this one, it can mean hidden or concealed. Now, that seems to make more sense to me in this. God has hidden the things he's doing from men. That's been some things have been said earlier. Could it be that God has put eternity? Yes. And what that would mean is we know there's more. We know there's someone out there. We know this is not all there is. So both fit, but it's hard to know exactly which one is which. I've done a rather long, as you can see on your screen, I've done a rather long discussion there of the different ways this word is used by different scholars and translations. And I hope you will look at that if you're interested in this thing. I think it is a key thought. What has God set in the heart of men that they cannot find? And why has he given humans a task that they cannot do? Well, it's to show us we can't do it, at least in this fallen fog we're in, but that there is somebody who wants us to know it and wants us to be with him. Galatians 3, please. The work which God has done. Now, this can be understood in two ways. Is this the work that God did from creation, before creation? Or is this the work that God does throughout a human being's life? Well, I can't tell which it is, but I don't think it makes any difference. I think both are true. God had a plan from the very beginning. We can't understand it. God has a plan for my life. I can't understand it, but I do believe there's a God, and I do believe there's a plan. Now, chapter 3, verses 12 through 13, this is a summary. We call it a strophe. In poetry, it's a strophe. In prose, it's a paragraph. But if you can see, this is printed like a paragraph because you cannot tell in Ecclesiastes when we're in prose or in poetry. So I'm going to call it a strophe. This is exactly same. It's not exactly the same, but there's another summary statement in chapter 2, verse 24 through 26 that is so important. Now, it suggests that although we cannot understand the mysteries of God, we can know what? Number one, God's love by faith and obedience. We can know God by faith and obedience. Number two, enjoy the simple pleasures of life provided by God. And I would say, enjoy them as they come and don't worry about the future and don't fret over the past. You can't change either one. Enjoy today. Smell the roses. Stop. Take life slower. Okay. I want to read a little bit. Please forgive me. Since we cannot understand or change the events in our individual lives or our world, we must focus on the thanksgiving for the common, simple, daily, but really wonderful things common to all human societies, but in reality are a gift from God. Chapter 2, verse 24, chapter 5, verse 19. These are spelled out in Ecclesiastes 3:13. Food, drink, a sense of purpose in one's labor. We could say we enjoy what we do. Our careers are meaningful to us. And from other verses in Ecclesiastes, one's family. And that would be chapter 9, verses 7 through 9. All of these gifts are from God. It is possible that the gift is one's faith perspective, which trusts in God, although we cannot understand one's own existential circumstances because of the fall, has affected our ability to comprehend ultimate truth. It must be revealed, not discovered. Man can't discover it. God must reveal it. Now, verse 14 is another crucial one. I'm going to read this, so please forgive me. I know that everything God has done will remain forever. Now, first of all, I hope you hear the transition. Everything man does leaves. Nothing lasts. Nothing's the same. Everything changes. Everything is in flux. How different with God. What God does doesn't change. God doesn't change. His purpose for the world doesn't change. His commitment to redemption doesn't change. God is stable and unchanging. Sinful man is fleeting and changeable and changing. So it's that contrast, so crucial in Ecclesiastes. Here again is the emphasis on the eternality and sovereignty of God and the transitoriness of human life. Ecclesiastes is as much a book about God as it is about humanity. The theology of a fallen world is only hinted at in the phrase under the sun, but the reality of a mysterious, painful, yet pleasurable world is characterized in vanity of vanity, all is vanity. Our mystery is God's clear, purposeful, knowledgeable, and comprehensive plan. Knowledge is not as crucial as trust, faith, and obedience. You hear Job 42 with that? I don't need to know more. I need to know him. Some of the texts which characterize the unknowable but present God are. Now look at my list there. You could add to it and change it. There's nothing inspired about my list. Number one, there is a divine plan at work. Now, I hope you see all my verses there. I'm not going to read all those. I probably wish I could. May I say to you, I've done a special topic that is so important to me where I have tried to explain this over the Testaments, and it's called Yahweh's Eternal Redemptive Plan. Oh, I hope you'll look at that sometime in the future. Number two, there is a sovereign Lord. There is a God behind the unknowableness of human life. There is daily faith which enables and ennobles. There is an appropriate awe and respect due to God. There is and will be a time of evaluation by God of every human being. Judgment is coming. God will bring into account every human being and test them about the gift of life. For God has so worked that men should fear him. Now, this is the truth of chapter 3, verse 10. The word fear him, it means awe, respect, and that's the purpose of the futility of this fallen world. The futility is meant to give us a sense of hopelessness and then draw us to the God of hope. So he hadn't just left us here. This is not theism. He's with us, but we don't always understand and we don't always see. That which has been already is that which has already been. Now, there's several possibilities here. Are we talking about Ecclesiastes 1:9, nothing new in human activity? You say this is new, but really it happened before, but everybody forgot it happened before. Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new. Number two, it could be used tongue-in-cheek, sarcasm of life without God under the sun. Number three, it could refer to God's revelation to Moses. Now, this might sound strange, and I just want to give you a couple of parallels of where it might fit here. Deuteronomy 4:2 and Deuteronomy 12:32 are the two texts that say, do not add anything to God's word and do not take anything away from God's word or revelation. Now, that may be the thought here. Now, the next little phrase, God seeks that which is passed by. Again, this is Hebrew. This is wisdom literature, and it is tough to lock it down. This is a very difficult Hebrew phrase. Matter of fact, I've given 5 theories in here. If I give you 5 theories and look at all those different translations, nobody knows what this word means. Here's some of the thought. One, the one who is persecuted. The second one, what has been driven away. The third one, the idea all humans are in repetitive cycles. The fourth one, this is from the handbook, which I've said I like so much from the United Bible Societies, says the Hebrew word meant request or ask. If so, then God wants his special creation, man, to pursue what? Action at an appropriate time, daily pleasures, eternity, his activities, and his law. Now, this is kind of built on my possible theory of what the Hebrew word means. So let's just stop a minute. If you want to check me, what would you do? You got to go to Hebrew lexicon. You just got to learn the Hebrew alphabet. It's not that hard. It's 22 letters. Look up the word. It's going to be in English now. It's just going to show you the Hebrew letters. And then it's going to give you options. When you go to an English dictionary or a Spanish dictionary, it's going to have the root word, and then it's going to have a 1, 2, 3, ABC, which are all the different ways that word is used in different contexts. So what we're saying is, of all the possibilities of this word's meaning, which one best fits the context of Ecclesiastes? Now, the way you would do that is you would go to a concordance, look up that Hebrew root, and see where it's used. Now, if it's used a whole bunch of times in Ecclesiastes and nowhere else, you got to run the parallels in Ecclesiastes. If it's found in Job and Song of Songs, you got to run the wisdom literature. So that there's no easy way to do this. You know, I do this, takes me hours and hours to do this. I offer it to you in 30 seconds. And I think people go, oh, yeah, well, you need to learn to do this yourself. All I want to do is show you what's available. All I want to do is whet your appetite for you to do this. God wants you to understand the Bible for yourself. And all I'm trying to do is show you the wealth that's available to those who diligently seek. And friends, you wouldn't be watching this show for this podcast, wherever we call Zoom, for an hour and a half or so if you didn't have a hunger for that. So I hope you'll think about what I'm trying to do, give you options, and then you've got to think through them. Now, the next strophe or paragraph, however you want to see it, is verses 16 through 22. And again, under the sun is the first thing that comes up. Please go back to chapter 1, verse 3 and chapter 1, verse 9 for a full discussion of this key phrase, under the sun. Now, then it says, a place of justice, there is wickedness, and a place of righteousness, there is wickedness. Now, you say to yourself, what is that talking about? What does that mean? Well, you say, well, what is the place of justice? Well, it ought to be the law court. Or what is the place of righteousness? Well, it ought to be the place of worship. So here we have the two means of revelation, i.e., the priest and the law. And then we have the worship times, the songs of Israel, the teachings that come. So the problem is those things should reveal the character of God, but they don't. Why? Because men are selfish, evil, corrupt, and egotistical. The power corrupts. Total power turns into wickedness. There's no way around it. Humans cannot be trusted with power or knowledge because we're fallen, even redeemed man. Man, it just destroys. Now, the next little phrase, verses 17 and 18. In the notes, I have them separate, but I've put them together now that I've thought through this. God will judge both the righteous man and the wicked man. Now, exactly what are we talking about here? Well, it seemed to me there are two kind of statements being made. The first answer is this verse that God states that he will ultimately judge all human beings one day. Justice will come. Things are bad now. Things are unfair now. Things happen to good people that never should. God's going to set it straight. There's one possibility. The second possibility, but let me read that next paragraph if I could. Verse 17 has often been interpreted as an affirmation of the afterlife. Let me just kind of break this out a minute. Just give me a second. I'm doing a theological aside here. Although this is rare in Ecclesiastes, it's not completely unique. If it is true that God is fair and the righteous will prosper and the wicked will be judged, this is the two ways. Now, this is what Job had such trouble with, and what Psalm 73, David had such trouble with. You look at life, and that doesn't seem to be true. The wicked prosper, and the righteous get crushed. What is going on? Well, if the Bible's true, and you get crushed in this life, and you're a godly person, there's got to be another life, or the Bible's just not true. There's got to be a day when God sets it straight, and that's apparently after death. So this may be a hint toward that. I don't know if you buy that or not. Then the only conclusion is there must be an afterlife. Now, I've listed several verses there. These are the judgment scenes of God. You got to think through this. I really think there's a lot of places that we find resurrection or afterlife in Job and in Ecclesiastes that probably is not really there. There are two places in Job, a couple of places in Psalms, maybe one or two places in Ecclesiastes that hint about it, but it's more implied than stated. This is a good place where progressive revelation is true. In the Old Testament, Sheol is a dark, conscious, but silent place. We know nothing about the place of people, good and bad, after they die. It's only with New Testament revelation this becomes fuller. And that is true of so many theological items. Remember, the New Testament is not a negation, but a fulfillment of the Old. And so we've got to see how these doctrines move through time. Now, remember at the beginning of this lesson, I said we're doing biblical theology. We're seeing what the inspired author said, the people of his day. And that's how I always interpret the Bible. But I hope you know how many parallel passages I give to you in these texts, because there is progressive revelation. There is clear teaching passages on these subjects, and that's what we're looking for. But as we bring in the parallel passages, we're widening biblical theology into systematic theology. And we've got to be careful that the texts really do link up. I know I'm fussing. I've been looking at some of these YouTube videos on other subjects. I'm amazed how godly, educated, prayerful Christian teachers and preachers go through the Bible, pick out verses, stick them together when nothing in that verse seems to say they go together, and then they give their timeline of these events as if it was scripture. And if you don't agree, you don't agree with the Bible. Well, I'm appalled. I'm not Paul. I'm appalled. You heard about forgot the guy's name. He was a kind of a preacher in northern United States, and he was in this new kind of a theology, and somebody said, oh, it's Norman Vincent Peale, said, Peale is appalling, but Paul is appealing. That's cute. It's one of those Hebrew play on words. You'll get over it in a minute. Okay. Let's go down to number 18 in your notes, 318, but it's really the second answer to this question. This is the second answer to apparent injustice. And is that God is surely testing everything. So, does God know who are really his when pressure comes? Yes. It is pressure that really separates the sheep from the goats. It is testing that really shows those who are really his and really not. None of us like testing. You can see in your notes, I have a special topic. God tests his people. None of us like that. But friends, it runs all the way through the Bible, including Jesus was driven by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil, Matthew 4 and Luke 4. So God does test. It shows who we are. It's easy to say, I love God, I trust God. But when the hammer hits, do you still love God? Do you still trust God? When tomorrow doesn't turn out the way you wanted, when the past is so bad, when today seems, do you really trust him? Well, you'll show your true colors in time of stress. I was thinking just now, Hebrews 5:8, Jesus was perfected by the things that he suffered. Boy, we hate that verse. We just hate that verse. Now, the next little phrase is so strange. And look at this. In order for them to see that they are but beast. Holy moly. Now there's going to be a play on the word beast from verse 18 and verse 19. Now this word beast is the Hebrew word nephesh. Now nephesh, I think, comes in Genesis 1, where it talks about God brought animals, cows, living creatures on the earth. Nephesh basically means a life form on this planet. It breathes air, it eats food, it excretes, it reproduces in the atmosphere of this planet. So man is a nephesh. Man became a living soul, Genesis 2. But the cattle are also called nephesh. So it simply means life form. So what we're going to have here is this play, and Ecclesiastes is going to drive this home. Beast and men both have nephesh. How do you know the spirit of one goes up and the spirit of the other goes down? They're both going to die. They both live, breathe, and eat the same way. See, this is pushing. Do you think man is special? Why do you think man is special? Is man just one of many involved species on this planet? Or is man really created in the image and likeness of God? Genesis 1, 26 and 27. That's the thrust of this, though it's just slap you in your face. Sarcasm, when you look at it, ooh, it's really tough. Now, I want to make a point on this before I leave. You know, from time to time, I quote the Jewish Publication Society because it's important to me to see how Jewish scholars interpret these Hebrew words in the modern context of all the things we found, like the Dead Sea Scrolls and some of the monuments and carvings in Israel. I want to see how Jewish scholars, Hebrew scholars, understand these terms in a modern sense. So the Jewish Publication Society of America is something I go to a lot. And now watch what they say. They say it to disassociate them from divine beings. Disassociate them from divine beings. Well, what do we do with that? As I come to this as an interpreter, first I say, is there anything in this text that hints toward divine beings versus beast? The only thing I can come up with is the word Elohim, the word God itself. Now, Elohim can refer to different things: angels, judges, the gods of the nations. Is that what we're talking about? It looks to me like this is just reading into this far too much. The text just does not have anything that points me toward the spiritual realm. We're looking at life as if there is no God. We're comparing life on this planet. So I think that the Jewish Publication Society has missed this. Although, just to be fair, you can see in the notes that I've given you a couple of new special topics I just got through rewriting recently. If you want to see how Elohim can be used of angels in the spiritual realm, you go to the names for deity, number C. It's Elohim. If you want to see about the heavenly council of angels, there's a special topic on the heavenly council. If you want to see how the word godly ones and godly one is used in Psalm, there's a special topic for that, and I hope that you'll look at that. It's interesting to you. Okay, let's go then to verses 20 through 22. And here is an expansion of what we begin talking about in 19. It's the word breath. Now, the word breath and the word nephesh, both are connected. Remember where it says, in God formed man out of the Tigris Euphrates, the red clay. The word Adam means red clay. And breathed into him the breath of life, and he became a living soul. Okay, the breath of life, this is the idea of ruah. This is the word for wind, breath, and spirit in the Old Testament. Now, he became a living soul. That's the word nephesh, a creature of this planet. So now, what do we have here is this ideal about, I think, Genesis 2:7, the ideal of nephesh. And then look at verse 20. All go to the same place. All came from dust and all returned to dust. Friends, I think the author of this book knew Genesis 2:7, where it specifically talks about God created us from the dust, the clay of the Tigris Euphrates. Now, this idea that we are but dust occurs in two beautiful Psalms. Close a whole lot of places, but Psalm 103 verse 14 and Psalm 104 verse 29. He knows that we're but dust and we're going to return to dust. So in Ecclesiastes day, we're transitory. We're made of transitory stuff. We're here for a period, and we're going to turn back into transitory stuff. This is the fleetingness of human life. This is the, we're here and we're gone. And that's the emphasis, I think. Who knows that? Now, this verse 21 is just a killer. Who knows that the spirit of men go up, the spirit of beasts go down? My boy, he's really pushing these materialists and naturalists here. Are you any better than a dead dog? Are you any better than a dead lion? I mean, is there any distinction in human beings to animals? Well, if you're a naturalist, there is not any distinction. We're just a part of an evolutionary train, and we're not even the end of it. We're just a link in it. So this is a powerful thing, I think. Now, this same phrase, who knows that, is used in chapter 2:19 and chapter 6:12. The reason I bring that up, a real good Lutheran exegete that I really think does a good job in his commentaries is Loophole. And he mentioned here that he takes this Hebrew in a different way. He thinks this is not a question, but an interrogative and a definite article. Now, if that's true, then instead of a question, this is an affirmation. And to me, this affirmation makes more sense in context than a question. But you've got to kind of look at this and see, okay? Now, let's do the up and down for a minute. People they drive me crazy sometimes in how uninformed they are in the literary aspect of the Bible. They just want to make every detail of the Bible absolutely true and absolutely literal. And this is where the Bible gets criticized for being a three-storied universe. God is up, the dead are below. Friends, we're speaking in what we call phenomenological language. It's called the language of the five senses. Genesis 1 is like a human being looking at God doing something and recording it in the five senses. That's phenomenological language. For us to say that God is up and death is down. Now, what is the imagery there? Well, when you do a sacrifice, the smoke goes where? It goes up. The visible turns into the invisible. Sacrifice goes to God who's in heaven. That's the imagery. When you go down, this is the idea that Israel, though not all ancient Near Eastern cultures, but Israel buried their dead. So where are the dead? They're in the ground. Whether you're a human being or a dog, in the ground. So that's the imagery here. So be careful of pushing it too much. You get crazy. What will come after him? Now, some would say this necessitates an afterlife. I think I'm not bothered by that. So 21 might be that. I hope you'll look at that. Look at the parallel passages. Verse 22 is another summary statement. It's like chapter 2, 24 through 26. It's like chapter 3, 12 and 13. And it's a recurrent theme. A theme. I hope you'll look at chapter 2, 24 and 26. Enjoy daily life. Oh, that is the powerful message of Ecclesiastes. You can't control tomorrow. Things happen that shouldn't. Bad things come, bad things go. What can I do? Sit down with loved ones. Have a good meal together. Trust God. These are the things. Okay. Now, notice it says, this is his lot. Now, notice that New King James, this is his heritage. So the problem is here, this has a wide semantic field. I've tried to show you this by just looking at the way the New American Standard translate this word. Some places it's reward, some places legacy, some places lot, some place share, some place portion. You got to look at words only have meaning in context. Let me read my last little paragraph. This refers to that which happens to an individual during his earthly life. Sometimes good, sometimes evil, sometimes fair, sometimes unfair. There is a divine but unknowable plan. I think there is a knowable plan from the New Testament, but in Coley, there's no knowable plan. He's agnostic, not atheistic. He's agnostic. Therefore, enjoy what is available to you. Enjoy the simple daily pleasures of an earthly life as they come. Humans are ignorant of the past and future. All they have is the present. Okay. Well, that's chapter 3. It took longer than I thought. Okay, let's go to chapter 4. I want to look again at the outline to the New King James Version. I think it has a good outline of how this chapter breaks out. Notice, injustice seems to prevail. Now, this is one reason why I don't think Solomon wrote this. Solomon's king. He can stop government abuse, government injustice. See, this author is helpless. That's another hint that Solomon didn't write this. The vanity of selfish toil. Oh, I worked so hard. Yeah, but what did it get you? You just leave it for somebody else. The value of a friend. This is one of the few places where friendship and companionship are lifted up, verses 9 through 12. And then finally, popularity passes away. If you're looking for fame, this, we say he got his 15 minutes of fame. Yeah. If you search and search and search for fame, can it last? No, no. Okay, let's look at contextual insights just for a minute. I think 4 and 5 form a literary unit. I do. You can decide if you agree with that. These two recurrent themes come back over and over. Enjoy daily life, and I'm giving you all the verses. And what is a true advantage? Where is lasting gain found? And I've given you all the verses there. I wanted to mention, I've just added this to my notes so you don't have it, but let me talk about it a minute. Verses 9 through 12 is a unique strophe on the value of friendship, companionship, and community. I think that's so important. The communal aspects of life are a blessing to help humans cope with the futility and discouragement of an earthly life after the fall. It is helpful to get through the grief, the pain, the danger, and the frustration with another person, another group, another friend. Boy, how much better is life with a spouse? How much better is life with children? How much better is life with true friends? How much better is life with church fellowship? How much better is life being a part of a group where you're accepted and honored? Man, this is important stuff. We can't control everything, but we can have some friends. We can have a family. Poor or rich, smart or dumb. We can have these things. Okay, let's go then. Chapter 4, verse 1. Acts of oppression. I put in my notes, this shows to me that Solomon can't write this because he could fix it. Under the sun, key phrase. Please look at the notes at Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 3 and verse 9, both of them. Had no one to comfort them. Now, in this context, this has got to be a government. What did the little famous Ronald Reagan said, the 7 worst words? I'm from the government and I'm here to help. That's this context here. There's no help from the government. There's no help from the king. There's no help from the provincial leaders. There's no help from the town. Man is without help unless he's rich and powerful. So that's the idea here. Now, verses 2 and 3, and I'm going to read that. This is so strange. I hope you have your Bibles open. This is 2 and 3, chapter 4, verse 2 and 3. So I congratulate the dead who are already dead more than the living who are still living. But better off than both of them are the one who has never existed, who has never seen evil activity of what is done under the sun. Mercy me. You talk about a negative statement. Man. So what are we talking about? Well, notice I'm giving you 2 options there that I think are helpful. Number 1 is this book that I've mentioned to you over and over by Card called The Language and Imagery of the Bible. He says this is hyperbole. It's a purposeful overstatement to get your attention, to arrest your interest. I think that fits. But the second possibility, does it deal? And I've changed my notes a little bit here because I think it's not pre-existent so much, but if you think about it, it's prenatal existence. It's a life in the womb more than just a life before. And I think I would add to this text that I've given you, Jeremiah 1:5. So I think we're talking about not just pre-existence going backwards, but talking after conceptions, what I really think it is. But, I'm not sure about that. Under the sun, this is the key theological phrase. I want to quote this. I thought it was clever. I wrote this. I like my own writing. Life apart from God is dog eat dog, me at any cost, power makes right. If fallen humanity is left to itself, it will corrupt everything. Amen? Man. They had no one to comfort them. There's the government. Verse 2 and 3. There's the hyperbole or pre-existence. Now, the word better in verse 3, this is a comparative statement used so many times in Ecclesiastes. Look at all the times I've given your notes. And it's translated different ways. Now, what I've given you here, I think, is the New American Standard, but you can see the semantic field behind this one Hebrew root. Look at this. Enjoy yourself. good, better, be happy, pleasing, well, cheerful. Wow. You mean that word can have that kind of range of meaning? Yes, and that's why you got to lock down which one fits best in this context. Coley's thought is a comparison on two levels: life here on earth and the physical compared to the spiritual. That's the deal. Is this all there is? Is there more? That's the idea. Now, verse 4. Life is a competition for food, shelter, for work, for possessions, for honor, and for control. This is the philosophy of atheistic humanism. Power makes right. This is human egos run amok. Without God, the only motive is me. This is where laissez-faire capitalism is a human curse, and this is where communism has failed every time. Every human is envious. Every human takes advantage. Every human exploits his fellow man. Life without God is a dog-eat-dog life of competition and unsatisfied lust for more and more for me at any cost. All of us have had a time in our life before we were saved. We felt the pressure of competition, the pressure of just wait till something happens in society, and I guarantee you people will kill you for a glass of water. Now, community is only together as long as there's not a crisis. Humans, the will to survive is stronger quite often than the will to pray. Now, striving after the wind, this is the play on the word ruah. This is the hopelessness of the human condition. The word fool in verse 5, this seems to be a proverb, and maybe verse 6 is a proverb. Remember I told you this wisdom literature went across national boundaries. So quite often these pithy sayings were used by different groups, even though they put them in different settings. So this looks like proverbs to me. The word here in verse 6 means rest. The Masoretic, that's in the New American Standard, the Masoretic text has quietness. If so, then it represents a workaholic and a sluggard being contrasted, which sounds more like Proverbs to me than Ecclesiastes. But now let's go to the next strophe, if we could, chapter 4, verse 8, and look again at the wide semantical field. Literally, this is the Hebrew word a second. Now that's going to appear several more times, a second, particularly when we get into verses 9 through 12 about a companion, a friend, it could be a spouse, it could be a neighbor, it could be a family member. The word a second is used 3 times through here, and it doesn't define itself, just the numeral second. I want to read this one which says, his eyes are not satisfied with riches, because I think people think if I just won the lottery, I'd be happy. I heard this week someone won what? $1.2 billion in Florida. And I told Peggy, I said, that'll probably destroy that person and all their family. The track record of people winning the lottery is a track record of human disaster. Humans don't handle wealth, power, fame very well. Let me read my little note to you. In many ways, without God, wealth is a curse. Before long, it controls us. Those who are wealthy on earthly things never seem to have enough. Life is consumed with more and more, and every effort is made to protect what is accumulated. A good modern example would be the strange truth of the disaster of winning a lot of money in the lottery. Statistics show that winning destroys the winners. We need more than wealth and possessions to find true happiness and lasting gain, permanent advantage. We need God. We are created by Him, for Him, and apart from Him, there is no purpose or lasting joy. Now, this chapter 9 through 12, this is this advantage of friendship of someone else. Again, it's just the Hebrew word a second. I've listed some of the things you could think about. I don't think it's anything necessarily that's for sure in this context. I have mentioned that the Jewish Study Bible says that the 3 cords or the 3 strands is an idiom that goes back to Sumerian literature about the power of 3. Well, that shows it's a ancient Near Eastern wisdom idiom that goes across cultural lines. Now, the strophe of 13 through 16. This is so specific. Most people have said this is so specific, it's got to refer to some historical event recorded in the Bible. And so some say Joseph versus Pharaoh, and some say Saul versus David. I'm not sure. However, the point of the whole paragraph is the fickleness of the populace. No lasting help can come from politics. Amen. Fallen humanity cannot be governed into blessing and peace. Selfishness, corruption, and greed will permeate all. Why? Because we're fallen. Because we're fallen. Okay, good. Let's go to chapter 5 then. Again, I want to look at just a minute on the opening outline, if I could. The New King James, I think, has a good set of outlines here as far as the paragraph division and the subject. Fear God and keep your vows. Now, that's the first emphasis we're going to talk about here. The second one is the vanity of gain and honor. And this will go from chapter 5:8 through chapter 6 at some point. So I think that's a good one. So let's go to contextual insights, if we could, for just a moment. I mentioned to you that I think chapters 4 and 5 are a literary unit. And it's basically the reason we want to know that is because we're letting the author structure his thoughts. He's presenting us truth. Now, how does he structure that truth? How does he divide it into subjects? That's what trying to find these literary units is meant to do. Chapter 5 begins with a number of commands or warnings about worship. And I've listed some of these for you here. Now, listen to this. This is about how do we act when we approach God. Listen to this list. Guard your steps. Do not be hasty in word, impulsive in thought. Let your words be few. Do not be late in paying a vow. Pay what you vow. Do not say It's a mistake. Fear God. Now this is guidelines for worship. So what are we talking about? There's more to life than just the human situation. There is God. Now the recurrent themes here, as I've listed for you, enjoy each day in the simple God-given pleasures of life as they come. Fear God and keep the commandments. These are the two recurrent themes about worship and God and how we ought to approach it. Now, verse 1. Verse 1 in English is really verse 17 of chapter 4 in the Masoretic text. And where you put that verse kind of depends on who's talking to who. So it's good to look at that and see what you think. Now, the next one, guard your steps. Now, literally, it's guard your feet in the Masoretic text. And this is an idiom for proper actions and motives. Now, I don't know. I don't see it in my notes there, but I think there's a special topic I've done to try to show you how walking becomes a biblical metaphor for lifestyle faith. And the special topic is called the path, the way. And it's not on there, Charlie, so they can't see it. But if you go to special topics later, the path, the way, you'll see how this idiom of guard your feet is used across all of biblical witness. Now, the word listen, this is that powerful word Shema, which means to hear so as to do. And you see there's a special topic on Shema, the famous ones in Deuteronomy chapter 4 and chapter 6. But so I hope if you're interested in Shema, it's not just knowing the truth, it's living out the truth. And I think that's crucial. Now, what is the deal to offer? Now, this unfortunately is not the usual word for offering a sacrifice. There is a very common word. Why would the author choose a different word? Well, we're just guessing here, really. We're thinking maybe it's the sacrifice of the lips, because we're going to talk about don't say too much for God, keep your words few, So maybe the sacrifice we offer is the words of our lips, our praise. That's possible, I think, and it might fit. Notice in verse 2, these are all imperfects used as jussives, which is a command. Let me read this, please. Kolith warns of thoughtless verbosity, i.e., do not be hasty in word in God's presence. It is not the eloquence or length of prayers that impresses God, but the devoted and faithful heart of the one praying. Hear Jesus' words in that. It's not how much we pray, how often we pray. It's the heart that prays. Do not be hasty. Do not be rash. Now, this is the term hasty, and in this PL stem, that's one of the forms that a verb can appear in Hebrew. It can mean dismay or terrify, but it also can mean hasten or make haste. So it's obvious in this context, the second meaning fits perfect. So now we know how this word fits in of all its semantical field. Now, God is in heaven. Again, this is Old Testament imagery of heaven being up. This is Old Testament imagery, and the rabbis argued, is there 3 heavens or 7 heavens based on these number symbolism? I've done a special topic, as you can see, the heavens and the 3rd heaven. If you're interested about some of that, it's there. Therefore, let your words be few. Now, this is a proverbial emphasis throughout wisdom literature, not only in other wisdom books in the Bible, but throughout wisdom literature of the ancient Near East, especially in the presence of the king. Be careful what you say. Now, the word dream here, this is probably another well-known proverb that's being quoted across biblical lines and other cultures. It can refer to, and I've listed 3 things that I think, again, it's just speculation on my part, but I hope you'll think about it. Simple sleep. Rich people never sleep because they're worried about getting more or keeping what they got. But a poor man with nothing lays down at night and goes to sleep. Contentment is a great blessing. Secondly, sometimes we get prophecies when we're asleep. Sometimes they're good prophecies, and sometimes they're false prophecies. So is this talking about a means of revelation? There's a special topic you see there called Ways of Revelation, where I list all the different ways that God communicates. Dreams can be one, but they can also be false. So you got to watch out. Now, verse 4. This idea of making a vow. First of all, you're never encouraged to make a vow in the Bible, particularly Leviticus 27. Don't make a vow. But if you make one, keep it. Now, this is what we ought to say again. Christian weddings are a vow. A faith commitment is a vow. We are promising God of what we're going to do and be. God takes our words seriously. And Koheleth is saying, if you vow, pay it. Now, the little phrase, the messenger of God, you can see the different ways. Some say angel, some say priest. You look at the context here. Now, the word itself, the word in Hebrew and in Greek simply means messenger. The word Malachi, that's the name of the last book of the Bible. That's the word for messenger. Now, you got to look at the context for what kind of messenger it is. Sometimes it is God's messenger. Sometimes Gabriel is the thrust, or the angel of the Lord. But in this context, it's probably the priest, because that's where you're going to make the vow. If you're a woman, you got to have your husband verify it, but you're going to make it to a priest. And that's why I think priest fits better. Now, you'll notice I've added a little word here, a little item I don't have in your notes. So just look at me for a minute. It says it was a mistake. Don't say to the priest, what I vowed was a mistake. No, don't do that. Why? Well, this word mistake is really a word that means an inadvertent act. I want to talk to you briefly about, in the Old Testament, there are things that we do by ignorance or passions, and things we do premeditatively. I want you to know that if we act inadvertently, there is a sacrifice. If we act, King James calls it the sin of the high hand, premeditatively, known sin. Friends, I want you to know there is no sacrifice for sin. Don't you thank God you're in the New Testament here? Now, if you want to see all the verses on that, the special topic is called unintentional sins. And I list all the places where that's spoken in the Old Testament. And that surprises some people that the Day of Atonement really only covered the corporate sins, like you found a dead body and the land's polluted. So the Day of Atonement did not deal with the sins of premeditation for individuals. I hope you'll think through that. Okay, now verse 7, I marked this to be read, so give me a minute. Sorry I read this, but I think I wrote it well, and I don't have a photo. Somebody asked me, said, do you have a photographic memory? I said, I think I do, but my developer leaks. So no, I can't hold this all in my mind. Human words, thoughts, eloquent and multiplied, are vain, empty, and meaningless. Be they prayers, dreams, or vows. The key is not the sacrifice or the prayer or the vower, but the object of their address, God. An attitude of awe and respect is crucial. It's not how well we say it, how often we say it, how much we say it. It's who we say it to, because he knows our hearts. He knows us. Now, notice it says, fear God. That's been a recurrent admonition. And I've listed for you, if you see your notes there, Charlie put them on the screen, thank goodness. I've listed all the places in the New Testament wisdom literature where it says fear God. This is a crucial thing. I do have a special topic called Fear Old Testament, if you want to see the Hebrew word and how it's used. But this is a good list, I think, if you're willing to look those up. Now, verse 9, the king who cultivates a field is the advantage of the land. This is a killer text. Nobody knows this is talking about. If they do, run. We're either talking about the king, and he's going to not be godly probably, or we're talking about the capital K king, God. And it's not sure. So notice the theories. I've given you theories kind of summed up here. God himself is the answer. Lasting gain is only from God, or God's gift of the land is the source of wealth in this life and for an agricultural community. I really don't know what that's talking about. I've done the best that I know. I hope you'll look at it, think about it. I don't think a major truth is being revealed here. I just think it's kind of hidden in the vocabulary of its own day. So let's go to verse 10. He who loves money will not be satisfied. Now notice it's not money that's the problem. You hear 2 Timothy 6:10. It's the love of money. It's the priority of money. It's the seeking money, money, money for money's sake. It's thinking that money can bring us happiness. There's the problem. All of us, I run a ministry where I've spent, I'm embarrassed to tell you how much I've spent on having these commentaries translated into foreign languages. God has put a lot of money at my disposal, and I've used it for the kingdom. All of us who do ministry need money to do ministry. But when you sacrifice your ministry for more and more money, friends, I've just seen too many Christian groups. It looked like they've sacrificed the purpose of their calling just to raise more funds. If God's in it, he'll provide the money. And if you think happiness is wealth, you've got another thing coming. I've done a special topic called wealth where I've tried to lay this out in detail. This is a really long special topic, and I hope you'll look at it. Again, notice the next little abundance, wealth, rich, luxury. This Hebrew word has a wide semantical field. And if you'll look, isn't it surprising some of the meanings of this root word? Some of it looks like a sound or a tumult of languages or a bunch of numbers or abundance. You really got to look. It looks like money and the term are in a parallel relationship, wealth and crowd applause. So we're talking about fame and wealth don't bring it. When the good things increase, those who consume them increase. Now, people who, let's just say they build a really nice house. I think nice houses are fine. There's no problem. Then you worry about somebody breaking into your house. So you buy an expensive alarm system. You have it put in by somebody. Then you're still worried. So you hire private guards, right? So, and then you get servants to help hide it. So the more you have, the more and more you have to pay people to keep what you have. So this is the idea here, I think. You just keep spending more and more. The more you have, the more other people consume of what you have. Sleep of a working man is pleasant, but the wealthy are always afraid. They always fret. But a poor man with nothing but his cloak rolls up, thanks his God, eats his bread, and goes to sleep in peace. Again, Koheleth returns to the familiar theme. Enjoy the moment. Smell the roses. Happiness is found in the simple, free, daily life experiences of humans. What? Sleep. Sleep is a gift from God. Contentment is a gift from God. Perspective. This world is not all there is. A gift from God. Why did this happen? I don't know. But God is with me and for me. This is Ecclesiastes. Verses 13 through 16, riches are transitory and temporal. I don't think I have to dwell on that much. Verse 14, a bad investment. Now, this is the word task, and I've given you all the different ways it's been translated. Two suggestions in the most famous Hebrew lexicons that I have available to me, a bad business or a bad affair. So that's what we're talking about here. Now, eats in darkness, this is another killer idiom. So there's been so many phases. Some think the phrase refers to a workaholic, a stingy man, or someone who was once wealthy but now poor. So here's the examples. Sometimes the word darkness is literal, day and night. Sometimes it refers to ignorance. They don't know God. They're a fool. They're living in darkness. Sometimes it's an imagery for distress, the dark days. Sometimes it means obscurity. Now that's what that's chapter 6, verse 4. This is what the United Bible Society's text project, which is they have 5 volumes where they look at different Hebrew text. And they say they think this fits. He eats in obscurity because he lacks even a lamp to give light for his meals. Well, that's pretty discouraging, right? Well, that's the deal. And much sorrow. Now, this again is talking about anger or frustration. This is used twice in Ecclesiastes 5:17 and 7:9. It's used often in the scripture of God, but here it's the idea of life without God. There are several Hebrew texts that disagree on what this is. This goes back to that Hebrew text project I was mentioning to you. And it gives this, the individual that does not take into account God's presence, God's gifts, and God's plan, and it lists the things that bring great confusion, lives in darkness, lives in great frustration, lives in sickness, and lives in anger. So gripey, mad, wealthy, agnostic, atheistic person. To eat and drink and enjoy oneself. Look at verse 18 and 19. How many times have I said this over and over? This is the theme. There is a God. There is a purpose. Men don't know it. Men are crippled by the fall. Life seems so hopeless, helpless, and we can't control it. But life has an element of pleasure and contentment and joy. This is the world that God has made. This world belongs to God. This world be redeemed by God. There's joy here is where is pain. And that's what we're talking about. Okay, let's see. I'm getting kind of where I want to stop and let you do questions. So let me do just a couple more. I think I'm going to stop there. I want to read one more thing. Chapter 5, verse 20, God keeps him occupied. I'll read this paragraph and then you can think about questions you might want to ask me. The one verbal means to keep somebody busy. The same root is used in Ecclesiastes 1:13 and 3:10 and translated task. God gives both the grievous task and relief from the grievous task. Again, the worldview, i.e., under the sun, without God, brings vanity and meaninglessness. But the worldview of awe and respect, truth and obedience brings a God-given joy in one's daily labors and family life, irrespective of the person's wealth, wisdom, or fame. What a wonderful promise and truth. Amen. Well, Ecclesiastes will make your hair gray and turn your toenails black. It is so weird and so different, and you got to understand what's happening here. Or the rabbi said, what is this book doing in the Bible? It is so negative. Well, you got to ask yourself, you take it literally, I don't know what's in the Bible for either, but if you try to see these keywords and see how it fits into wisdom literature in general of the ancient Near East, it has a powerful message, and it's a message targeted toward those who think they've got life figured out, those who think everything's okay with me, I got enough, and they find out they don't. Okay, well, Vidal, if you'll kind of deal with the questions for me, I'll be happy to talk to anybody.
We're always excited to have you guys share any thoughts or reactions to tonight. And although there is a lot to digest, as usual, still we'd love to hear from you. So if you have a question for Dr. Bob, whether you want to use the chat or you want to open up your mic, we'd love to hear from you. All right, Dr. Bob, I don't think we have anyone right now.
Okay. Well, next week, we're going to do 6, 7, and 8 next week. So again, if you would read it ahead of time, and again, as you read it, you may want to read it in 2 translations, a word for word translation and a dynamic equivalent. And if there's a strange idiom or if a verse seems to make no sense, you want to mark that because that's the one you're going to see maybe how I deal with it. And I want to say to you again, you know, if you got 7 preachers on interpreting this, you'd probably get 10 interpretations. So please let my understanding be a stepping stone to your own. And let me just kind of whet the appetite for you to think through this. But I guarantee you, you can't think through this unless you know something of the genre of wisdom literature and you know something of the ancient Near East and its vocabulary and idioms. So you got to do some homework. Again, we're trying to put ourselves in the historical setting of the original inspired author. And the way we make sure our interpretation is in the ballpark, we say to ourselves, could the original hearers have understood? What would they have understood? Now, those are the two guiding criteria. Now, once we find that, then I think we can apply this to our day, our life, our family, and our friends. But until you get the original author's intent, now we're never sure 100%, but we're looking for what the people of that day could have understood. And then